invitation into session. This is a joint meeting with the county commissioners to hear the facility audit report.
Okay, at this time I'd like to call the Person County Board of County Commissioners out of recess for the school board county commissioner joint meeting. Glad that everybody could be here today. Kyle sends his regrets. He has some personnel issues that kept him from coming back after our meeting this morning, and he wanted you guys to know that it was something that he couldn't avoid. At this time, I think we're going to pass it over to Dr. Peters, or is Kate? All right, Larry, start.
All right, thank you. Thank you to the county for allowing us to meet together and present the plan, long-range facility needs plan that we've been undergoing for about a year now. We appreciate the opportunity to present it. Today we have Ed Gordon, who is Vice President of Smith Senate Architects, and he has been performing this study for us. He's an accredited learning environmental planner. He is very knowledgeable about the process, and he has been a great asset for us to get this developed. So at this time, I'd be glad to turn this over to Ed and let him present the information to you now. Thank you.
Well, thank you for letting me be here. Do I need to push a button or everything's working? All right. I'll apologize for my not walking around and shaking everybody's hand. I figure you'll understand that the wheelchair feels a whole lot better right now than being up and walking around. As Larry said, this has been a long time coming, and there's really a couple of things that I think is important for you guys to understand. The first thing that I'm going to run through is capacity, and there's been a big change in the number of kids you're going to be allowed to keep in your elementary schools. This is House Bill 90-115C, it's state statute, and what it does is it reduces the number of kids that are allowed in certain classrooms, grades kindergarten through first grade. And this is not a pat presentation of any sort. If you guys want me to stop and back up on something, please let me know. I'm going to try and roll through this pretty quick because there's a lot of stuff here. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Yeah. Okay, one of the problems with attendance boundaries and kids in attendance boundaries is that you don't have the same number of kids in second grade that you might in fourth grade, that you might in fifth grade. So every year it's a little bit different. Again, talking about House Bill 90 and 115C. And I'm going to use an example of Helena that everybody is somewhat familiar with. It's real easy to calculate student capacity. You're allowed a certain number of kids in a classroom. You got a certain number of those types of classrooms. You multiply it, add it up, and you've got the capacity for the school. One of the problems is that the grade level, the number of kids you're allowed to have in a grade level, that should be down at the bottom left, if everybody can see that. In the year 2021, it changes, starting with kindergarten and going up. You're allowed 18, 16, 17, 17, and then fourth and fifth grade, you can put as many kids as you want to in there by the state statute. All of this stuff is pretty standard, straightforward, North Carolina Department of Public Instruction methodology for putting this stuff together. I'm flipping the page on it. So the attendance boundary is kind of real important. So the little dots are your county with an attendance boundary put around it. Helena is kind of unique in that it's about a 600 student school using the old number of counts. What you would expect in a sixth grade elementary school of 600 students is about 100 students per grade. It's just math, and over the course of period, over the course of time, you'll get that even distribution, but every year is a little different. So we got that attendance boundary, and then over the course even of that year, you've got kids popping in and out. So trying to hit that maximum capacity or that maximum efficiency almost becomes impossible. Okay, so back to that even distribution. You would expect 16.67% of your population in each grade level. And if you look, Helena, February 20th of this year, going across, you can see how many kids you had in those grade levels at that time. And you can look below it and see the percentage of the population in that grade level. And if you look at fourth grade, you got a really large fourth grade population that particular day. So again, going back and looking at that number of kids that you're going to be allowed in 2021 to have that 18, 16, 17, 17, it makes it real difficult to maximize the efficiency of a school building. So this is a long-range approach. This is not a day-to-day basis kind of thing. This is trying to figure out what's right, what a reasonable maximum is. So looking at Helena and so in 2017, for the population you had at that particular day, February 20th, normally in the past, you would have needed 28 classrooms. Now you're going to need 32 classrooms to get those same kids in that distribution. This one I have to look at as I go through it, sorry. So looking at Helena, we've got our grade levels coming down and the years coming down. That's how many kids you're allowed in 2017, 18, 19, 20, and 21. You can see that drop in the number of kids you're allowed to have in the classroom. So looking at the number of classrooms and how many students you can get in those classrooms, you can kind of see how that population is falling off a little bit. And the way we found that we could get the best distribution was in the 2021 year, was to take one of the 5th grades and move it down to a 2nd grade so that we could get that even distribution back without trying to pack the 4th and 5th. Did that make sense? Okay, I don't hear anybody asking. So that totals 31 classrooms. There's an exceptional children's self-contained classroom there that I'm going to count in that 31, but it doesn't really relate to that distribution. But you can see up at the top, does this have a little laser pointer on it?
It does.
Little red. All right, so there you had, does that say 680?
Yes.
Sorry. 680, and it drops down to that 583. So I'm going to take you through something else. So that average per classroom, that's taking the 680, dividing it by 6 to get what you would expect for the number of kids evenly distributed throughout the grade levels. The next number is an efficiency of when you are going to develop a problem in a grade level, even though you're not at that maximum capacity because of the probability of those differentials. So what we look at when we're planning is we look to these numbers so that you kind of know about when you're going to be full. Principals are pretty smart. They figured out ways to kind of tweak things and move things and shift things around, but anything beyond that number in old days, anything beyond that number, that 468, something's going to have to give. Somebody's going to have to shuffle something around to make things work out. This tries to go as far as we can before it just doesn't work. I'll show you exactly what I mean. So in each classroom for those grade levels, for instance, in 1st grade, you have to take 5 chairs out of every classroom. Is that kind of understanding the implications of how strong this thing is? You lose 97 seats in Helena because of this new legislation. Looking at it another way, I'm going to say that bar in the back is kind of that even distribution, what you would expect over the course, long-term, long period. Again, this is February 20th. Those are the actual populations, and at the top, that kind of red bar, you can see the capacity kind of come along there. Right now, you can deal with it, and what that really is shifting a classroom from the 4th grade, up to the 4th grade, from 1st or 2nd grade, something like that, up to the 4th grade, so you can hit that. I'm going to back it up again. So I'm just shifting a classroom up to make it work, and that's what all your principals know how to do. It's real simple kind of thing. All right, back to where we used to be and what it's going to look like. Oops, sorry. So that's where we used to be, and that's what it's going to look like. You can see that population curve coming down, and when we have to take that 1 5th grade classroom and give it over to the 2nd grade to kind of make things work out, it really hurts that 5th grade population. Optimally, the way this is laid out with that new 18, 16, 17, 17 distribution, to make it work out flush fully, you should probably have about 3.5 to 4 empty seats per classroom to deal with those fluctuations that happen throughout the year and over individual years. Oh, okay. So there's a thing that's a waiver that allows a school, if they have an overpopulation in one grade level, to do a waiver. You can do up to 3 per classroom. This doesn't work. Sorry. This one doesn't work, so we're going to have to move some things around. So what we're going to do is we're going to shift the classroom down to kindergarten. So before we were over in the, what's that, 3rd grade? There's 18 too many kids. Okay, so we can, for the number of classrooms, we can get 5 classrooms, so that's 15. I need another hand, but that's 15. So we still can't make it even with waivers. So that's where we have to shift it down to a lower grade, and we get a waiver of 1 kid in the total of all of the kindergarten classrooms.
That makes the assumption that the state is going to allow us to continue to have a waiver. Because right now, they do not, they build in 3, but you cannot request a waiver in regular classrooms. You can only request waivers now in your PE, your art, and your music. So I think that's an important understanding here.
And that's 3 waivers per school?
You can do a waiver per school for the what I call special classes in terms of art, music, PE, media, and those kind of things. But that was part of the emergency legislation that went out last year as a result of everybody complaining they didn't have enough capacity space. And that was a temporary fix. And so we're just hoping that the General Assembly continues down that track to allow the waiver process. But we haven't been told that that it will be a continued piece of legislation that will continue beyond 2021.
Well, what does that mean for all your schools? You're losing 433 seats across just your elementary schools. So going back, what are you left with? Well, you can reduce the size of the elementary schools, restrict that population, restrict your attendance boundaries. You can pack the 4th and 5th grades. When you do that, when you start counting the number of classrooms, in that one 4th grade classroom, you can have 104 kids and still comply with the state statute. It doesn't work, but just kind of talking through some of the options. Drop programs, art, music, PE, and other things like that in teaching those classrooms. And some of the school systems have been talking about paying their superintendent, because the way the state statute is, if they don't comply with that, the superintendent does not get paid by the state.
So I need to get paid. But I will say that this morning the board took a proactive approach with this, because we did get the latest from Numerex on the proposed where the seats will begin to diminish beginning next year with the class size reduction. So this morning the board took action for Stories Creek, Helena, and Oak Lane. Those schools are now what we consider cap schools, where we will not allow any student reassignments to those schools unless there are extenuating circumstances that would allow it. So our board has taken action to start limiting the access to those schools.
Well, that's pretty much it for the capacity. You're losing a lot of capacity due to state regulations. Does anybody have any questions they want me to go back on anything? Otherwise, I'll just proceed on with kind of giving you a run through of what you got in front of you now.
When you say shrink attendance boundary, what is attendance boundary?
I don't know if I've got the image up there. That little colorful image that's on the front of your book, that book that's sitting next to you, those are the attendance boundaries. So you can solve a particular school's issues by having less kids within that attendance boundary. I mean, it's going to create issues somewhere else. And when we've done this in other places, We've always talked about the idea of redistricting as a first option because it doesn't cost anything. I don't think you have enough space in your elementary schools to be able to do that.
Of the options you gave us on the second to last slide, what seems to be the most prevalently used for other districts? What are other people doing?
A lot of them are building. Some of them are moving towards a year-round program with the 4 or 5 track kind of thing that you've seen Wake County use in the past. They're doing more of that. And they are figuring out how to do some things like put 2 teachers in a classroom, which really kills the efficiency of how much you're paying to teach kids in a classroom. They've come up with a handful of different ways. Be more than happy to pull in what they really came up with. I mean, it's a real simple presentation they've given a handful of times. It doesn't make it traditional anymore, meaning they're giving up some things to be able to comply with the statutes. They're trying to keep all their arts and all their musics and all their PEs, but it's some of the other larger resource rooms where, you would pull somebody out for a little one-on-one training for math or something like that. That room now is gone. We're teaching in those classrooms.
So we're expected to lose 431 seats across the elementary schools. And these other school systems are building. So does that mean you would be looking at a school or building a school to replace? Okay. So for those 431 to go?
I think it's a reasonable option to look at, yes, sir.
Where is this in comparison to what our population is going to tell us? Will we have 431 kids displaced?
I was just saying, let's look at the forecast that Dr. Peterson was talking about. I think that's a better way to kind of let you kind of see what it is. And we'll run through that in just a minute with this. All right, we can always come back. You ready for number 2? All right. So what you've got in front of you is about a year's worth of documenting, looking at, calculating what you have here at your school system. It will put you to sleep, so if you have problems at night, I recommend reading through it. But I thought I'd give you a quick rundown of the kind of key points of what the different things are. There's about 215 or so pages to this thing, so rather than try to get in depth, I'm not going to, and I'm just going to kind of work my way through it. One of the first things you'll come across is the acreage of your individual campuses. This is pretty much looking at DPI's standard for a 1-story school, and you need certain amounts of acreage. You've got 2 that kind of pop up as red. Neither one of them is a real big issue. The first one is Earl Bradshaw. It's a little bit small, meaning the campus is a little bit small for the number of kids there. There's some things that we can do to kind of make some things flow better and all that, but it's not egregious. It's just a little bit small. And then you look at your high school. And with DPI, they're saying if that was a 1-story building, you would be out of capacity. I mean, it's a tight campus in the first place. So it's pretty tight, but it's not egregious. So that's on page 7. Okay, page 9 is looking at those core capacities. Student and core capacity, sorry. So in that first column, and just looking at 2021, not looking at all the others, but that is just math. That's just the number of kids you're allowed to have in a classroom times the number of classrooms, and you get your maximum ADM. Now that's one of those numbers that you're not going to be able to hit because of that population distribution and everything else that goes on throughout the years, but it's there. Whoops, hitting the wrong button, hitting the wrong button. There we go. That next column is the efficiency of the different schools, your different schools. The bigger schools you can usually get a better efficiency with. The smaller schools, it's reduced. And that final number over here, actual, that's the number that we typically recommend using when you're trying to figure out attendance boundaries and how many kids you need to have at a particular school. Is that core over there on the end? Okay. Core capacity is a function of the square footage you have in your media center and in your cafeteria. You're pretty good on everything. We'll go into that a little bit more later, but it's just a straight ratio, 4 square foot per student kind of thing. This is that chart that we're going to get into again in a minute, but this is within that executive summary. This is that work that Mike Miller from Numerex did. Mike Miller's been doing these numbers for NC State for many years. He's a mathematician by trade and a really, really smart guy. Let's see. Okay, the color breakdown's pretty easy. It's red is not good, orange is also not great, yellow's kind of okay, and green you're doing pretty good. So you've got some elementary things going on, but when you get into your middle and high schools, it looks like you're going to be doing okay. Another thing we're looking at on page 11 is life cycle analysis. You've got some older schools, and as you look at that, there's a graphic associated with it, and overall, that's when you're going to start having problems. For the most part, when buildings are torn down in the United States, they're between 70 and 80 years old. That doesn't mean if it's 70 or 80 years old, you have to tear it down. That's just when most of them wind up being torn down. The numbers right below that little table, you can see you've got some things, about 20% of your square footage that's edging towards that 70-year age. Okay, this is one that always creates a lot of discussion. The number down there at the bottom is not a request. It is just a tally of all of the things that we found when we went through the buildings, meaning right now in this room you've got T12s or T8 light bulbs. You can change them out to LEDs and they'll pay for themselves in about 3 years. They'll pay for themselves in about 3 years, meaning the replacement cost, they'll save the energy. So it's looking at all of those things. You would not do all of these things. It's simply a list, an accounting of these are all the pieces and parts that we found. Some of them are going to be in combination with other things. If you do this, then you don't need to do the things in there. That makes sense, because this one really gets a lot of people kind of stuck on a $55 million number that we're presenting. It's not a request. Okay. Oh, so in some of these cases, because you have some extra space on the campus, there is potential to put down an addition. This would be additions and renovations, meaning we've got some classrooms that are smaller than standard. So it would be the potential to go in, reorganize the walls in there, make them the right size, and then put an addition on. And this is all if you decided to. This is about as far as you could take these schools without really overburdening the site and everything else that's going on. Again, not a request. Oh, and then down at the bottom, threw in something that is kind of a standard, what you would expect to pay for a building of an elementary school or a middle school or a high school. I just threw them all in there so everybody kind of had a sense of how expensive buildings are. I guess the other thing I should talk about is that when we're doing this, there's a contingency that we put onto this for pieces and parts, things that might need to be changed, some DOT road work that might need to be different or something like that, along with 3% for 3 years of inflation. It usually takes a few years to get all the funds, the plan, everything figured out exactly what we're doing, and 3% is a historical inflation increase in the construction industry. It's been a little crazy over the past few years, but we try to hold that conservative 3% per year. And there's nothing about tariffs or any of everybody's busy now because of hurricanes, stuff like that. That is not included in any of this these calculations.
And the contingency is 10%?
For the most part, 10%. We've run them different ways, and as we proceed through this and kind of talking about everything, the more we know and are sure of, we'll start to pull that contingency back out, if that makes sense. a little bit of demographics. This is mostly going census data, and it's kind of giving you a sense of where you are, as well as what your neighbors look like, where their growth is and all that kind of stuff. Durham is growing, so you kind of know what's going on down at the south border kind of stuff. And then the next chart is kind of looking at your student age population. That highlighted green section are the ages of the kids primarily in your schools. Okay, now here's where we start to get back into the Mike Miller stuff, where you can see some of that red. I really like the next picture, which is what Mike has done to kind of organize this stuff, and it shows where you've got changes and how many seats you don't have anymore. And then I'm going to flip to the next slide, should be slide 22, and we can go back and look at all these in detail. But this one I thought was really telling, with 47 empty seats in your elementary schools. That's how many empty seats you've got in your elementary schools. You've got 148 classrooms to divide those 47 students up. I hope that says 47, yeah. It may say 44 on some of your notes. We got an update this weekend from Mike Miller, from 44 to 47. I'd be happy to back up and we can kind of talk through any of these other things that you want to look at. But
That's in your book. It's not in your handout. It's in page 22 in the book. That chart is.
okay. 22 in your book.
Saw Frida over there worrying that she didn't know where things were.
Well,
Pages.
well, with the stuff that Mike sent recently, I thought it was appropriate to hit.
Yeah, so everything that Mike sent yesterday or yesterday morning, they need to refer to the book because we did not, I didn't know where you were going to go with it.
Okay. So Mike Miller just did this, he did 20-day counts, is that right?
DPI just released a 20-day ADM,
Okay. So
average daily membership, excuse me.
So page 20 through 22 in your books is going to be about right. That was updated this morning. And it turns out that it looks like you're going to have about 47 empty seats. What is that, in a year? I can't see the year. 28? And I'd be happy to answer any questions that I can. Mike Miller is really the expert in this stuff, but I'm going to go ahead and roll on then. We can come back to it. Okay, that's your attendance boundaries. That's real simple. That's one of the first things we're probably going to look at when we're talking about trying to solve some of these problems. And on page 36, we start to look at year 2021, and we've done it for every year, and it's in your book, but you can kind of see how these capacities continue to reduce over the course of the next 3-4 years. On page 38, you can get a better feel for that core capacity piece. In some cases, your media center is limiting you, and in some cases, your cafeteria is limiting you. Media center for me is not that nerve-wracking. It's when you've got a severely undersized cafeteria that you wind up starting to serve lunch, 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, and you're not done with the last feeding until, just a half hour or so before kids go out. That's an extreme. That's not what's going on here, but that's why it's important to have a right-sized cafeteria to go along with your population. All right. What is that? Oh. And it looks like I've got some things out of order. I apologize. Did I click too many? I clicked too many. All right. This is a diagram of how those capacities were put together. So if you look at the top one, this is kind of how it's being used right now, or how it was earlier in the year. If you look real close and squint your eyes real hard, you can see that there were a couple empty classrooms. Right now, the school's undersized, meaning it's under capacity. I apologize. And if you look at that same thing run again for 2021, we have to use every single room, still holding those resources, those pull-out spaces as best we can to figure out what the maximum capacity is. And it's really a diagram, so you can kind of see where student capacity is, where the administrative is, as well as where those core spaces are. So in doing all this, we sat down and kind of talked through what was needed by Person County to do the education. Really, it came down to, we were matching up real closely with the North Carolina Department of Public Construction minimum facility standards that we didn't really have very much to talk about. So pretty much everything in here is to those standards. You can look through, there may be a couple of minor variations, but there's nothing that's really popping out in my mind as being a big difference. Plus. Some of your older schools have smaller classrooms. It was in the mid-'80s that the DPI came out with what they called their basic education plan. At that point, that increased the size of the classrooms. So most of the stuff you have that was built after the 80s has larger classrooms. Some of the older buildings have smaller classrooms. This is a comparison of each one of your buildings per type of classroom. And then over at the right-hand side, you can see what DPI says those square footages should actually be. And again, looking at a diagram of those, on the top is Earl Bradshaw that has a lot of smaller classroom sizes. You guys are doing something that's kind of relating to that, but it's an older building and it has smaller classrooms. Whereas you look at something like Helena, most of the classrooms are pretty much right-sized. As you get into about page 80, this is where we get back into that life cycle analysis kind of portion. You have some buildings that were put down, they're older, some that were put down in 2000, some additions and some new stuff. So as you kind of look at that, you can kind of see what their future life expectancy is per year. It's a little graphic. And then you move on a couple of pages and it's back to that chart, that table that I was showing you before, and then a graphic of where you can see how some of your square footages are aged. Some of the things that were built back in the 50s, 40s, 50s, were related to baby boomers, and some of that stuff was put down pretty quickly. It does not have the same life expectancy as some of the newer buildings or some of the older buildings. So when you've got a bunch of those baby buildings that were built during the baby boom, you're going to have to put more money in them to kind of bring them up because they weren't built of the same quality as they were before and after the baby boom. Okay. This is looking at what's called a facilities condition index. And what it does is it compares the value of the building against all of the pieces and parts that we found within that building that could be improved upon, all the way back to those LED light replacements. It's really comparative analysis. So it's looking from the same assessment methodology and picking, for instance, the one on top I think is tax. Or is that insurance? It's insurance. That's from the school system's insurance company for the value of the building. So you compare those two numbers and you come up with some ratios. Those are the ratios. The higher the ratio, the more that was found that needs to be discussed, maybe improved. So it's a relative of the value of the improvement to the value of the building. And then off to the side so that everybody can kind of see it, because this makes a lot of sense to kind of think about it in this way too, is a cost per square foot, meaning taking the total square footage over the cost of those improvements that were identified. We did it two different ways. Ran it once with insurance data and once with tax data. They're both independent. You can't compare the two, but it just gives us another thing. It's not something that says if you're over a 6 or over a 5 or a 7 or something like that, you need to tear the building down. It's just an understanding of there are more improvements here than maybe the value of the building. Okay, this whole section kind of groups some of this stuff again. If you're just trying to look at a particular school. Some of that square footage, the life cycle and all that is kind of repeated a little bit, but it's trying to group things. So here, that first sheet on that particular school is kind of talking about the site, tax values and everything like that. The next page looks at life cycle, a couple pictures, and goes back to that capacity diagram, so it's sitting right there for you. The next part, we had Progressive Design Collaborative come up and look at your plumbing, mechanical, and electrical systems. So there's a write-up of what the status is on each one of those pieces. These are kind of well, they're real important, and when you fix something like this, it doesn't look like you did anything to the building. Meaning a light switch doesn't last forever, but you don't really get a lot of, oh, we really did something by replacing a light switch. This is an individual assessment of each space in the building compared to those DPI minimum facility standards. It just allows you to kind of see how many you've got, how many you had. Some of the things like where we were talking about switching a fourth grade classroom down to a second grade classroom. Those things don't show up on here because they don't cost any money, so we don't need to talk about them. That's something that the principal and superintendent can figure out to do. It's when we find we need another science classroom. I mean, going in and putting in the casework and the infrastructure for all that kind of stuff costs money. So if it doesn't cost any money, it doesn't show up. The next page is just a brief, these are the costs per square footage for renovations and or additions that could be placed here if you decided to expand that campus. And this is where we're cataloging all of those deferred maintenance items or potential improvements, going back just like the LED kind of stuff. There's a lot of detail in here. It's organized not as a priorities, but it's organized based on North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. Every 5 years requires us to send a list of needs to them. It's their 5-year North Carolina facility. Do you remember the exact name of it, Larry? Okay. Anyway, it's organized based on their organization, so it's real easy for me to not come up here and Larry to just go, yeah, here you go, to submit that. Next page is a site plan kind of showing how everything is today, and the next has got some coloration in it to show some potential improvements. So at Helena, what we're looking at is some safety, security, roadway kind of stuff, primarily that's showing up there. And with that, that's about as fast as I think I can get through all of the information in the book. So I'd be happy to go back to anything anybody would like to talk about.
Thank you. I'd like to see you do this report for the legislature.
I would like to do this report in front of the legislature. There's some questions I would like to ask.
They make the rules, but they don't know what it takes to run a school district.
Nope.
But thank you.
There's a lot of information for you in a short period of time, and I know you want to take some time to look at it, but we do have lots of information here that you need to thoroughly look at, lots of systems that are coming up on needing repairs in the near future, such as mechanical systems and things like that, even in the buildings that we'll keep or whatever we're going to do. So it's lots of work here, lots of stuff that needs to be done in the near future.
Any further questions?
I think what we would like to do is to put together a committee that is representative of the school system as well as the county commissioners and county government to really go through this and to try to determine what our priorities need to be. We've got safety and security issues that have to be addressed. We have issues with handicapped accessibility that need to be addressed. And plus we've got to come up with some extra classrooms. So that would be our recommendation at this point, is the formation of that committee with representatives and start meeting to figure out where we go from here.
Okay. With the recent change in the Board of County Commissioners, if you guys would allow us to get through the December meeting once we change over and get new leadership in place, that would be greatly appreciated. Any further questions? Dr. Peterson, you got anything else for us?
No, sir. I just appreciate the county commissioners initiating this study. I think it's very well written. Appreciate Ed and his group coming down and doing it. There's a lot of things came to light to me on things we could do better, and especially in how we organize our schools. I think I spoke to Larry the other day. We're going to have to start looking at some of this, the organization of the schools beginning this current year at the end of the year, so that we're not trying to look at 2021 and doing 7 schools all at one time. So I appreciate the commissioners putting together this study.
If there's nothing else from anyone, I'd entertain a motion for the county commissioners to adjourn. All right. Got a motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed?
And I need a motion to adjourn the Person County Board of Education meeting. Is there a second? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.
We don't have to.